99.99% of our ideas about the world we're inheriting from other people, from our community, from our group.
Memberships and group ties that more or less do reflect something like their values, and voting based on those is going to generally give them pretty good outcomes. But of course, thinking about politics through groups has huge downsides, and one of the maybe most salient these days is polarization. I'm sure you've all seen a plot like this before. We have a little pink curve of Republicans and a little blue curve of Democrats. They're moving further apart from each other over time as Republicans and Democrats become more likely to take the opposite side from one another in various policy issues. And this is not just a policy divide. People often these days feel much more negatively towards people in the other party than they did before. This is a plot of people who are saying they would be upset if their child married someone from the opposite party. These days, maybe a third or a half of people say they would be upset if this happened. And in the 1960s, these numbers were close to zero. So there's been a really dramatic change, and a lot of literature has been spent trying to figure out exactly what's going on here. There are a lot of explanations, especially great ones at the elite level that are not really under my purview today, but one that is this. As more groups have come to sort based on party, as more of your identities are aligned with either the Democratic or the Republican Party evenly, people's animosities towards one another have more and more reasons, more and more justifications. So just to explain a little bit. In the 1970s, your ideology was not particularly predictive of your party, especially at the mass level. There were a lot of conservative Democrats and a lot of liberal Republicans. These days, that's just not the case. People who live in urban and rural areas are increasingly likely to belong to different political parties from one another. And people with different beliefs about race and racial progress are increasingly likely to belong to different political parties from one another. So if you imagine someone from 1960 answering this question, would you be mad if your child married someone in the opposite party? Maybe not. That person might still share an ideology or share a geographic membership with you, still feel.
So is polarization really, that awful a thing? The United States has the most thriving economy in the world, right? And our politics look the most dysfunctional, all right? The culture wars operate at 5 to 10% of the intensity of America in Australia and in Europe, right? So Janan Ganesh, the most prestigious, most talked about columnist writing today, writes for the Financial Times, got a column out. Lesson of the Great American Boom, maybe politics, which for decades has been dysfunctional in the United States, doesn't matter that much. And that's the point that Tom Wolfe made, that American politics is incredibly boring, that American politics is a freight train just going down the railway tracks, and people on the right and people on the left complain, but that train is just going to keep going down the tracks. So in Europe, you hear a lot of American voices. Why? Because of the power of American tourists, because their economy consistently outperforms the rest of the world. And America continues to roar ahead, all right? The stock market is at an all-time high. Yet there have been more presidential impeachments in the past generation than in the previous 2 centuries of our republic. And at the turn of the millennium, 44% of Americans trusted the federal government. Now 16% do. The U.S. failed to achieve a peaceful transfer of power at its last election. All right, so much political turmoil, so little economic consequence. Why? Because politics does not play much of a role in most people's lives.